Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for being here. My name is Lindsay Wallace. I'm the Director of Strategic Projects and Design Services here at Main Street America. Welcome to today's webinar on Design in COVID-19 Response and Recovery. We're joined today by a special guest, Shah Sprague, the Senior Director of Government Relations at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So he will be speaking a little bit later into the presentation, but we're so glad that he's here to join. That's me. I wanted to make sure you saw my face. I think nowadays it's important that we're seeing pictures and video and all of that of each other. So that's me. Just a few housekeeping notes at the top here. This presentation will be recorded as usual, available for rewatching and watching. It will be accessible by using your login, and it will be posted to our COVID-19 resource page, which I'll give you the link at the end of the presentation. You have all been muted. We have about 430 people registered today, so we won't be able to do verbal questions, but there is a question box. Please feel free to type in your questions as we're talking, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of the program. And Shah has graciously offered to stay on with those questions, so we'll both be here to help with that. And just a quick disclaimer, I'm not a health official, so what we'll cover today, we'll offer some potential ideas and strategies, but just as ever, and as you do in your work, you'll need to work with your officials in your community to make sure all of the recommended policies are recognized, followed, and met. Plus, it's a great opportunity for partnerships, which of course we'll talk a little bit more about. So agenda for today, we're going to cover a few things, talk about design in COVID-19 just as an overall framework. We'll talk about some strategies, design strategies that focus on creating great places while creating physically safe spaces. We'll talk about design promotion and community engagement. There have been so many really wonderful examples from the network, from commercial district leaders across the country of how you've engaged your community through different kinds of initiatives, but certainly some of them are design angle to them, so we'll cover some of that. Then we'll get into preservation and design incentives. That's where Shah will join us to tell us a bit about the historic tax credit update. He and his team at the National Trust are true leaders in the HTC advocacy, so we're lucky that he's able to join us today to talk a bit about that. And then I'll talk a little bit more about local preservation and design funds, talk about how some folks are expanding or adjusting those incentive funds to address issues coming up from this crisis. And we'll also talk about some messaging around some of those incentives. And then we'll end with Q&A. So let's get it started. You've probably seen some of the things that my colleague Matt Wagner, who's our VP of Revitalization Programs, he's been really doing a lot of focused research on trends and impacts in COVID-19. So some things that he's found, of course, e-commerce rates are higher than ever, which I'm sure you've kind of seen some of the similar types of information. But this pandemic is really having and will likely have a lasting impact on our personal relationship to space. So for this conversation, this piece is especially important where, social distancing, gatherings of certain, numbers of people, our psyche is changed a bit to how that kind of stuff works. And so, we need to think about how design can help support people feeling safe and get them, out and about when it's safe to do so. People are getting used to delivery and pickup, so we'll look at a couple of ways to design solutions that can help support that. There's a lack of certainty on many fronts, so businesses, civic and government institutions. So that lack of certainty can be really off-putting and scary, but it can also create some unforeseen opportunities for partnerships and kind of new initiatives and ideas. We'll talk a bit about that. There have been some tourism shifts, or likely there'll be some tourism shifts where more people are going to be doing some staycations, doing trips by car rather than flights, Airbnbs, camping being more popular, especially as rural places are becoming more appealing for trips and vacation. The rush to rural, a lot of people are leaving kind of their bigger city homes, going to second homes if they have them. Wouldn't that be something? But there has been this rush to rural, right, where a lot of rural places have been kind of inundated with people coming from bigger cities, and what does that mean to density? What does that mean to existing population, et cetera? And then, of course, something to keep in mind, reopening is going to look different depending on location, right? It's going to be so different across the country. Smaller communities in one part of the country, it's going to maybe look very different in smaller communities in another part of the country. So just keep in mind that that place-based piece is always at the top of the mind for this kind of work. So design in this context, right? So when we usually talk about the Main Street 4-point approach, design is really seen as, of course, this enhancing the physical and visual elements of downtown while capitalizing on unique assets. And all of that's still true. Design, as we've seen it, focuses on all of these kinds of things. Historic preservation is central. It's a key lens by which we, look at our work. Architectural assistance, design regulation. But what I really wanted to look at today, because I think the first step in recovery and how design can address that is really more focused on these last four, in public spaces, signage, streetscapes, and then building maintenance and improvements. So we'll talk a bit about those, but I think, while design covers all of this, we're a little bit more focused on the latter four. When we talk about design kind of in overall, how we talk about the comprehensive approach, Main Street approach, is looking at design as the cycle of investment, right? So an improved image, when you have an improved image by employing the standards of quality design, that leads to more customers, which leads to higher profits, which then leads to more investment in business and property. And while that's true, right, our environment has changed a lot in the past few months and will likely be impacted for longer. So when we think about the most helpful way to think about design and the cycle of investment in COVID-19 response and recovery is first thinking about prioritizing creating physically safe spaces and enhanced infrastructure, which we'll talk about, which can then lead to more customers, more visitors, and engaged community. So all of those pieces are important, even if people aren't buying a lot in the first wave of recovery. Engaging them, getting them to feel safe downtown is really important, because then you have this improved sense of community, which can lead to higher profits. People might start shopping more, will continue to eat at local restaurants, those kinds of things, which then, of course, goes for the improved bottom line for small businesses, which is crucial right now, as well as local dollars reinvested. We'll get into our first section here on design, place, and space. So, as you know, we talk a lot about place in our work and how important place is to sustainable economic development, how place-based so much of our economic development work is, right? So we're going to look at how design initiatives can create these physically safe spaces that are going to be very important to people as we recover, as well as creating these great places that support the economy and reinvigorate a sense of community. So there's a lot of overlap in those terms, but we'll kind of go through it. We'll also talk about partnerships, identifying points of ownership, like who runs what program, those kinds of things, potential funding sources, and short-term and long-term planning for getting stuff done. So this is just a little comparative between what design-centered and place-centered means. This is from a blog that was published by the Project for Public Spaces, which of course you know is a great partner of ours. But I really liked this because it gets at the heart of what I'm trying to talk about today, which is that we are, when we enter into design initiatives in general, but specifically during this time of crisis, we're really looking at ways to create places that are community-based, community-driven, that prioritize partnerships, that are about how people enjoy them rather than having them driven by design. Now, of course, design experts are needed. I'm not an architect, but love architects, love landscape designers. Those kinds of folks who really have that expertise are crucial to this. But as we look at design in a commercial district setting, it really needs to be community-led, and more people need to feel like they have access and are included in those kinds of processes. So throwing that out there. And so when we talk about, what specific things are we seeing, what specific things that can people get into in terms of design initiatives to support this recovery? Kind of the top thing, and maybe the most short-term necessity, and really what a lot of folks across the country have already picked up on, is the importance of signage, right? So signage is very much a piece of design, it's a piece of promotion, it's kind of cross point, right, which is always what we're looking for. But signage is incredibly important right now in terms of creating these physically safe and distance spaces, as well as creating a sense of place, right? So as we know, curbside pickup for restaurants, for now retail in some places, is really important, and so signage can really help delineate those spaces, right? It's crucial to have this option and to keep businesses running in this time. And directional signage really makes it easier for customers to come back, right? Like, imagine going to a restaurant to pick something up and there's no signage. We are already in this state of heightened anxiety, and so people really need to be reassured, they need to be guided, and signage can really help do that. Because if it's confusing, people might not want to come back to that specific restaurant. So you're already seeing some great examples of this, whether it's formalized, run by the city, or some folks are doing DIY, which is great. So there are various options, on how to go about that. And similarly, the other ways that signage is crucial is helping kind of reinforce these physically safe spaces, right? So social distancing is very much a part of our existence right now, particularly when we are in public spaces. So these are just some great examples, I thought, of how to go about signage to indicate this kind of social distancing point, right? So the top two are really great examples from H Street in Washington, D.C., where they've partnered with the local Department of Transportation, other local folks who run transit there, that at bus stops, they have these great signs that are simple but well branded that indicate, hey, this is how far 6 feet is. Take care of yourself and be safe. So I love to see these kinds of things. When you're able to do branded signing, that's great. But, this can also be iterative. This photo there at the bottom left with the taped X's, it still gets the point across, and it still keeps people safe. It's still a visual element, but it's a good alternative if you don't have the budget or partners to create branded signage. There are plenty of iterative approaches that are interesting to look at, and more importantly, still get the job done. So there was a great article in Reuters recently about all the ways people are indicating these social distancing parameters through signage across throughout the world. So I think it was a great article to kind of get inspired, where it's great to have the branded signage when you can, but if you can't, there are some really interesting ways to delineate those spaces using some iterative approaches that maybe don't cost as much but still get the point across. So as we're talking about place and space and kind of these opportunities to have new partnerships and conversations maybe you haven't been able to have before, I'm definitely going to talk about streetscapes here, but I want to call out that this response and recovery offers unprecedented opportunities for conversations and partnerships with government entities, and particularly your departments of transportation, your parks and rec departments, your departments of natural resources. Some great opportunities to have conversations that maybe you haven't had a chance to before. So I wanted to call attention to a toolkit that we actually put out in the fall, Navigating Main Streets as Places, that offers all kinds of different things focused on creating people-first streets. This was a project that we worked on with the Project for Public Spaces, who have several experts on staff, transportation experts on staff, so great to work with them. But this guide, there's an 84-page guide, as well as an online resource library that offers research and data on the importance of people-first streets, multimodal transportation systems, streetscapes, as well as policy examples and recommended conversation starters with various types of stakeholders. So we'll cover some of that in this presentation, but I wanted to call this out because even though this was created obviously before COVID-19 hit us, there are some strategies and some ideas in that work that I think can help support some of your efforts in design. So getting to some other topics in talking about space, open streets is a really hot topic right now, and with good reason, because a major concern as we recover and reopen is going to be having enough room apart for people to be safe or to feel safe and to be outside. So open streets is a strategy that's been around for a while. Many of you have probably heard of it, where in the past, it's essentially been where streets are closed to vehicular traffic, but open for multimodal traffic and for pedestrians, to raise awareness for alternative transportation forms, to think about streets as places, think about them a little bit differently. It's been around for a while, and a really important advocacy and kind of design tool to think about our spaces a little differently. And so now, in this day and age when physical space is so important, this is something that more and more communities across the world are looking at. One example from Vilnius, Lithuania, they've been in the news a lot, and that's kind of a prime example of the good use of open streets, where, in places like their old town that's very compacted, very dense, they've decided to open the streets, literally kind of create this open air market where businesses can kind of spill out into the street. So it's not just for cafes and restaurants, which is huge and important, but also for, service providers like hairdressers, just to have a little bit more space to service more customers, but to do that safely. Some other examples: Hendersonville, North Carolina is a great example. They have an incredible road diet in their downtown, where their main street is a serpentine street, like an actual physically serpentine street that has created slower traffic patterns, as well as opportunities for outdoor seating and trees and green space. It's really lovely. But they're one community that's really looking at this open streets concept to employ in their downtown, to close down the street to car traffic, but to open it up for more extended spaces coming out of the downtown stores. Cleveland is another one looking into this. Same kind of concept, but it's really interesting how fast this concept has hit, because it's been around for a while, but in this context, clearly, this is pretty new. Streets Blog USA talked about, other cities from across the world that are doing this really well. And then this example from Long Beach, I just wanted to include the diagram there, so you can kind of see how people are thinking about, even when they keep part of the street open, looking at just extending the outdoor restaurant spaces, and in some cases, retail spaces, just somewhat into the street. Maybe you close down one lane, right? But just to give people a little more physical space. But I think this exercise kind of helps us think about all of our physical space, which is so connected to how we talk about design in commercial districts. Another tactic that we're hearing a lot about, and I'm really excited about it, is the use of parklets and pedlets to create that additional extended space. So again, many of you probably already had a parklet program or had heard of the concept, so it isn't an unfamiliar concept, but applying it in this day and age is really interesting and important. And luckily, there's a lot of great precedent to draw from in how you tweak your program or how you create one. So just some examples here. The Dallas Main Street did a parklet several years ago. This has been a while back now, where they had some businesses donate some of the material. They worked with local businesses to create a sense of ownership, where the business would kind of run the parklet after they helped to build it. And then it was so popular, of course, that with other business owners, they wanted to build their own parklets too, so it kind of spread from that. But it just gives you an additional space, right, which is the whole point. This parklet manual, so parklets, the concept of parklets started in San Francisco, and so there's a lot of really good resources coming out of San Francisco on this. This is a great manual to check out. NACTO, the National Association for City Transportation Officials, has great resources. Their website's one of the best in terms of looking at different resources, but the Urban Street Design Guide really shows some examples on how to actually implement parklets. So very cool. And then this is a great example from San Marcos, Texas, where they've been really innovative in this time, and they've created this temporary parklet program. And what's so cool about it is that they're approaching it as a template, as a temporary parklet manual, which maybe that would turn into a more permanent thing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. A lot of these design initiatives that we're talking about today can really be iterative. They can be temporary. They can be adjusted as needed. So we have to respond quickly to a lot of things right now, and so don't let like perfection be the enemy of the good, right? To quote that old saying. And then, kind of another extension to this conversation is PEDLETS, right? So, well, let me get back to this. So this picture there on the left is from the Project for Public Spaces Instagram account, kind of praising this really cool work that Better Block has been doing, Team Better Block. Many of you are probably familiar with them as well, but they've been really kind of leading the way for kinds of creative uses of parklets, and they've created this parklet in, I think it was in Dallas, where they've kind of prototyped this new parklet that offers the space for outdoor seating and tables like a lot of parklets do, but have followed all of the local regulations so that all of the distancing measures and recommendations are included in this design. It's very cool. But I also wanted to point out PEDLETS as kind of the sister or sibling to parklets, where, places like West Allis in Wisconsin and in Great Falls in Montana have built these really cool PEDLETS that go outside of the sidewalk for pedestrians to walk instead of the inverse, right? So I think this is a really interesting alternative too when you have potentially, businesses like sidewalk sales or retail folks that are going out onto the sidewalk, that a PEDLET can kind of keep the pedestrians moving, but at a safe distance. So just some really interesting ideas there. Similarly, infrastructure. So, we've heard a lot about the importance of thinking about sanitation stations, hand washing stations, those kinds of infrastructure pieces that will be important for folks to feel safe downtown. So, when you're not creating more space in the streetscape through PEDLETS or parklets, you can think about how to provide amenities to encourage people to feel safe downtown. So like these sanitation stations, outdoor seating for restaurants, as we talked about, that can be, employed in the parklets, in the PEDLETS, but to really just kind of extend that indoor space out to, have that safe distancing. It's also movable furniture. I think we've heard a lot from folks who are moving that kind of work through quickly and getting city approval more quickly to get some movable furniture out there, so that you create places for people to stop and rest, but again, at a distance, which is going to be really important as we recover. Similarly, when we think about like interiors, right? So there are going to have to be some retail adjustments. We know from the trends conversation that Matt has really been following that, this extended space is going to be really important on the outside and in our streetscapes, but also on the inside. So there's some really cool examples of how people are using space and how people are using interiors that I think are very important now, but are offering up some really interesting examples that we might be able to employ, in the weeks and months to come as we're all figuring out, the recovery and the short-term and long-term planning. So this example on the left is a hotel in Portland that's offering pop-up spaces in their big ballroom for entrepreneurs like barbers, right? So there's socially distanced spaces, but allowing some opportunity for entrepreneurs to keep working. So it's really interesting. It's going to be really important too for us to consider digital infrastructure and upgrading technology to support e-commerce, because even though small businesses will still have bricks and mortar locations, and hopefully, as we start to recover, they'll get more people coming downtown. A lot of folks are going to feel more comfortable ordering online. And so from a design standpoint, that means that commercial district leaders really have the opportunity to advocate for things like fiber, cell, wireless upgrades, so that small businesses have the opportunity to create and support like online retail platforms, as well as, for folks working from home, being able to have that kind of upgraded technology and technological infrastructure to support that kind of work and that shift that may still be in place, for weeks and months to come. The other piece, of course, is the redesigning of store interiors. There's going to be a need for wider aisles, for clear traffic patterns through the space. So there's going to be some upgraded guidance to that. And I think one thing, popping out from that is a really interesting opportunity to partner with your Department of Health. I mean, certainly to follow all the regulations put out, but could be a really interesting set of conversations around how that specifically should involve and consider small businesses and retail in particular. Now, this is a little more of a dry initiative that you could think about with design is around a building inventory. So another trend that we didn't mention, of course, is what's happening in terms of vacancy, in terms of rents and those kinds of things that always are something that we face and have some problems with in commercial districts, but that now, of course, are more of a critical stand or critical point. So one thing as a commercial district leader that is really helpful, and it's an ongoing design effort that, is started now or add to it now and keep it going, is to understand where your vacancies are, what the lease terms are for different rental spaces, what, if any, rental issues any of your small businesses are having, and whether or not you can help mitigate or offer any resources or guidance on, where what's going on in your community to help with rent forgiveness or rent deferrals. And then, the other piece, of course, is the building maintenance, where if there's some opportunities for that, it might be something good to keep an inventory of so you can help connect people to resources as you see issues pop up. It's also another opportunity to talk to your business owners and offer ideas and solutions where applicable. I mean, you are, as commercial district leaders, the connectors, the conveners, the seen as true sources of guidance and resources. So it's just another opportunity to connect with those business owners and see how you might be able to help them kind of weather the storm. Another really interesting angle with design initiatives is around trails and parks. So as you know, National Main Street Center has been really interested in the concept of trail-oriented development, and we've really been advocating for main streets that are located near trails and parks to leverage the access to that green space and those recreation opportunities for economic opportunity downtown, drawing people from the trail, attracting them to the amenities that you have downtown. So what's been really interesting is that, trail usage is up like exponentially. This is a trail count from the Rails to Trails Conservancy demonstrating just between, the 2 weeks or a week between March and April, just how much higher the usership has been. And that's just one example. It's we've been hearing it from across the country, just how important outdoor space is right now and how people are craving that. So if you have the opportunity, if you're located near trails, or if you have a park system, this is an excellent time to be talking to your Parks and Rec department, DOT if they're involved, your Department of Natural Resources at the state, to think about how to leverage this excitement around outdoor space, how to leverage that in your recovery efforts, how to connect the trail users to your downtown, what kind of amenities are they looking for, what can you offer. So it's a really cool opportunity. We actually have a lot of information on trail-oriented development that I can't get into now, but if you're interested in that, it's a big topic of interest for me, and I'm happy to share more information, but definitely think about that. If you have these kind of amenities, I think there's a huge opportunity in your recovery to think about how to connect that. So when you're thinking about place and space, of course, there are policy considerations, right? And many of you are really doing like innovative, creative work out there to get policies and regulations relaxed or shifted even temporarily. So very exciting. This image there on the right is an example from Shreveport, Louisiana, that the manager shared on the Point, which, plug for the Point, this is a great time, if you haven't been using the Point, to check it out, because there's a lot of really great information being exchanged on that platform about these different kinds of policies. Especially, it can be really really hard if you don't already have an example to enter into conversations with the folks that can make the decisions. So Liz Swain from Shreveport just had this great example and some great guidance. So check that out. But some other policy considerations to be thinking about, of course, there are transportation and streetscape regulations that may be relaxed during this time, or maybe at least offer up an opportunity to discuss how they might be relaxed. There could be an opportunity for flex zones, which basically means zones in the commercial district where pop-ups are allowed, where the like parklets, PEDLETS, those kinds of places can pop up or be temporarily. You're going to think about parking, of course, both about, your existing kind of parking regulations, but how parking lots may be reused, reconfigured for supporting the kinds of like curbside delivery and those kinds of changes and how the space and especially the streets and the parking are being used downtown. So thinking about what kind of regulations could be employed or lifted depending on how you might best suit those needs. Liquor licensing, we're hearing some really interesting examples of folks really leading the way in relaxing some of the liquor licensing so that more restaurants and bars can offer to-go cocktails or those kinds of things that can be money makers in this downtime. That's a really interesting piece. Rent forgiveness and deferral, we talked a bit about that already, but that's obviously a huge issue facing many of our small businesses. So thinking about what options there are in terms of rent support, rent forgiveness, rent deferral, what kinds of policies can be employed in that. Similarly with small business rental subsidies and incentives, especially for your vacant spaces or, of course, for your existing small businesses, are there ways to help support their rents and their kind of bottom line, which we'll talk a little bit more at the end here, but just wanted to flag some policy considerations you can start having conversations about. So we're going to talk more about planning and how to get it done at the end of the webinar, but I wanted to focus just quickly so we don't miss a thread about the who and how of actually getting some of these projects done, right? We can aspire, but we actually do have to do the work, right? So with design, one really cool thing about so many of these projects is that you do generally need partners, and of course you need funds to get it done. So there's a lot of opportunity in that. And for a lot of this, one of the most important things is to establish the point person who owns it or is responsible. Like, you as a Main Street leader, commercial district leader, can't necessarily lead everything. So one of the things that'll be very important is to figure out who runs what, who's the primary point person on what, which is important to not overload or overwork any one person or any one organization. But that's also important just in terms of partnerships and actually work planning. And I wanted to point out the opportunity here for your design committee too, where, as we talked about with the Refresh Main Street approach, a committee structure, if it works for you, how it is, awesome. Sometimes with the design committee, the best course is to have the design committee be project-based. So this could be a cool opportunity for your design committee to really be project-based around these kinds of initiatives that really address the needs and the upcoming issues and present issues, of course, with the COVID-19 impact. So they really could lead the way. So there's some, here's some new partnerships and, even potential board members, if they're not already on your board, to think about getting in touch with, have conversations, and hopefully do some quick initiatives with. And of course, focusing messaging on economic impact in recovery is crucial. Quality design for quality design's sake has a lot of merit, has a lot of value, but really these initiatives are meant to help with that economic impact and recovery, right? So it's really about the comprehensive approach that the Main Street approach always supports anyway. And of course, some funding for these kinds of projects. State recovery funds could go toward this, DOTs, CDBG to some extent, crowdfunding, local funds, private foundations, et cetera, all kinds of the kinds of players you're going to be thinking about. So just some quick examples on design and community engagement. So like I said, we have been collecting some stories on this. Our communications team has really been doing a cool job in collecting stories from across the country on how folks are engaging their community, because it's really important to interface with the public, remind them that you're there, that they are a part of the community. So there are some good ways, kind of design focused, to go about that. Because, you know, it can be incredibly isolating right now. So it's important for that community engagement just to pull them back in. So I'm just going to share a few examples of creativity from across the country that, you know, you can look at all of these in more detail on our COVID-19 resource page, which I'll show you at the end. So first up, Light Up the Night in Lakewood, Ohio, just a really cool idea where Lakewood Alive, which is the local Main Street organization, encouraged folks from across the community to put up lights in a show of solidarity, which turned out to be like a very beautiful and moving vision, but also a great opportunity for community engagement. This is in Waxahachie, Texas, where the downtown businesses have kind of banded together with the Waxahachie Main Street in creating these really cool window decals in the downtown. And there are many more examples from Waxahachie, but these three I just wanted to highlight that good messaging. This is about togetherness and a sense of community, really important in this time. And then just a bunch of other examples. There are people doing really cool public art downtown, doing virtual arts walks, using their incredible historic architecture and theater marquees to kind of send out messages for folks. And then some of these other really great kind of iterative temporary signage, like there are chalk walks right now, and in different businesses, these kinds of just really cool marker signs, just to reiterate, hey, this is really hard. We're all in this together. We're going to figure it out. It's really important stuff. So flying through, we're going to talk about some preservation and design incentives. So I want to talk specifically about incentives as economic impact tools. This is where our colleague Shah will help and talk a little bit about the historic tax credit, and then I'll talk about the local incentives after that. So just a quick refresher before I hand it over to Shah about the federal historic tax credits. Many of you are probably familiar with this. Hopefully have had some interface with the National Trust for Historic Preservation on this advocacy, but all I want to say about federal historic tax credits is that this is one of the strongest and most important economic tools that we have in Main Street, especially when it comes to the built environment and preservation. So it's incredibly important, and we're really glad that Shah is here to help us talk about. So Shah, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate the introduction, and it's good to be with everyone today. You've provided a lot of really interesting information about design considerations for Main Street in a post-COVID world, and a great recap of historic tax credits and how it interfaces with Main Street's 4-point approach and its relevance to design elements. And I have to say, I love learning about parklets and pedlets. Those are terms I was not familiar with that I'm glad to have learned about today. So thank you for educating me. So I wanted to take just a few minutes to describe our general HTC advocacy strategy and describe some of the resources that are available to you as we work to make historic tax credits part of the economic solution to our nation's recovery. A lot of what I'll touch on today is we covered on a webinar that the Trust hosted on April 24th, which you can revisit. In that webinar, you can take a little bit deeper dive into the policy aspects of HTC advocacy, but wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And the key message is that in a crisis there is opportunity, and as Lindsay said, there's a lot of unprecedented opportunity in front of us, and certainly that's the case as it relates to federal policy. I think we are now looking at our fourth piece of legislation passed by Congress in just a few months in unprecedented ways by unanimous consent and voice vote for major spending packages. So things that we have never seen before. But the message is that support for historic preservation and the historic tax credit in particular stimulates economic activity and job creation. And as the National Park Service notes, in its annual report, the HTC is credited with creating 2.7 million jobs over the life of the program. And after the webinar, or during, but we didn't get to it, we received a question about whether the historic tax credit is really, aligned with small projects, whether it's just a big project type incentive. And the Park Service does have some really important statistics for folks to keep in mind, which is that nearly half of all the historic tax credit projects, 46%, are under $1 million. And a further statistic, 25% of all projects are located in communities with less than 50,000 people. 15% of these projects are in communities with less than 25,000 people. So, we've seen how it's effective on, the smaller Main Street communities, and that's something certainly that we advocate for strengthening those provisions. We can also show that rehabilitation projects are labor intensive, that they create local jobs and provide startup space for small businesses. HTC development also pairs well with affordable housing projects, workforce housing, and opportunity zones. These are all areas that will receive a lot more attention in the coming weeks and months on Capitol Hill. Another point that we're making to Congress is that when the historic tax credit was increased in past emergency legislation to address economic challenges after natural disasters, the HTC helped kickstart rehabilitation activity and economic recovery. So before and after Hurricane Katrina, for example, with an increased credit, went from 20% to 26%. Rehab activity shot way up after a project pipeline had some time to develop. But the really interesting point on that is that even after the temporary increase in the credit expired, the level of economic activity using the credit was 4 times what it had been previously. So in Louisiana, that went from about 50 million to 200 million annually in HTC-driven rehab. So we've got really good data to make the case for how the historic tax credit will benefit the nation and Main Street in particular in our economic recovery. But we have a lot of uncertainty ahead. I don't expect that federal legislation will move as easily as it has up to this point, and that these next stimulus packages that they're talking about will receive more scrutiny and will be difficult to negotiate. And we're going to need, frankly, we're going to need your help reaching out to legislators in support of improvements to the historic tax credit and some of the funding requests that the preservation community and Main Street communities are advancing. So, this is a place we've been before. Your advocacy, as was the case during tax reform, was key to making the difference in making sure that the historic tax credit remained in place and that it wasn't eliminated. And we have that opportunity before us now. So I wanted to talk through some of the resources. Next slide, please, Lindsay. Thank you. That was supposed to cover that one before. But just touching on this slide, we're using examples of how the historic tax credit has been used before and its success to date as a key way to drive and target reinvestment. Next slide, please. So here I wanted to point out some of the resources that are available to you all on the National Trust website, the Advocacy Resource Center, which you can click on from this slide. We have, next slide, please. We have updated historic tax credit maps and project lists for each state, and they're organized by alphabetically by town. So you can go and look for your community on those project lists to see the projects that have occurred since 2002, which is when Park Service started aggregating this data. You just scroll over your state and you'll be able to download and print those, the map and lists. Next slide, please. So here is a one-pager that we've developed that you're also able to find on the Trust Advocacy Resource Center, which describes how investing in the historic tax credit is an investment in our economic recovery. So together, you'll notice at the top, several national partners are on this that outlines the request to Congress. So again, you can download this document and pass this along to your delegation, your congressional representatives, on how the changes will specifically help your Main Street community recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. And the key provisions on this one-pager are the Historic Tax Credit Growth and Opportunity Act. This is legislation that many of you may be familiar with. It's something we've been advocating for a long time about ways to update the credit. So we're asking that the HTC Go bill, which does enjoy broad bipartisan support on the Hill, should be part of a legislative package moving forward, as well as a boost to the credit from 20 to 30% for 4 years. Which, as I noted earlier, has been done in a more targeted way in the past, but we feel is warranted in helping kickstart rehabilitation activity nationwide. Next slide, please. So a couple ways to stay up to date with the work that we're doing to advance the historic tax credit. And I should note, for the folks that are unfamiliar with the HTC Go bill, there is a provision in there that would increase the credit from 20 to 30% permanently for small projects. And those small projects are defined as projects that have 2.5 million or less in qualified rehabilitation expenditures. So that is a provision that I particularly associate with having a Main Street focus. So we're hopeful that should that become law, that will be particularly helpful going forward. So staying up to date, the Trust will share resources and federal advocacy opportunities as they become available. Visit our website, forum.savingplaces.org, and be sure to tune into our social media channels. And if you haven't done so, please consider signing up for the Government Relations Department newsletter from the National Trust. You can do that by clicking on the link provided on this slide. And please stay tuned for additional webinars that we will be planning. I can tell you that we are looking at a webinar at the end of the month on the 28th that will cover in more detail some of the funding requests that are out there. So that, I think, will be another key webinar to tune into for an update on where the funding request stands. So again, I think that's it from me, but I will stay on for Q&A should you have any questions. For now, I will turn it back over to Lindsay. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaw. I'm really glad you had some time today. I did link to the webinar from the 24th at the end too, so they'll have a link directly to that. It was a really, really good webinar. I hope you all take the time to check it out. A lot of great information, but a lot of good actionable items on that. So thanks again, Shaw. Really, really cool stuff and important for all of us to keep abreast of. So I'm going to kind of go quickly through the next few slides, just so we have at least 5 minutes for Q&A. But keep in mind that these slides will be shareable. You'll have access to these. So if I go too fast through them, just know you'll have time to read them at your own time, and to obviously feel free to ask me questions even off this webinar. I'm around for that. So just wanted to quickly talk about local financial incentives for design and preservation as well. Just a couple of quick examples. Many of you have facade improvement, either grant or loan programs, different kinds of pools and that sort of thing for facade improvement programs that maybe you're thinking about pivoting or adjusting or expanding. Similarly, some of you might have preservation revolving funds, which if you don't and you're interested, please feel free to reach out to me separately. I'm really excited about the concept of revolving funds in Main Street. It's a newer thing. I mean, facade improvement funds have been around for a long time, but this concept of revolving funds is sort of new. Here's some quick information on that. I can talk to you more about it offline, but just to give you a sense of a couple of different kinds of funds that we have locally to think about in this COVID-19 world, right? So small business recovery funding needs that we're seeing, that you're seeing, that are rising to the top. So what small businesses need the most right now, right? General business support and design support for other kinds of projects than facade improvement. Maybe that, it kind of depends on the community, of course. You might have still really good uptake with your facade improvement programs, which is great. Don't want to see, hate to see that not happen, but if you're seeing, that small businesses really need other kinds of funding right now, then these are some ideas to think about in light of that. But just following the trends of what we're seeing small businesses really needing, these are the kinds of buckets we're really seeing in terms of need. If you're thinking about expanding or adjusting your existing facade improvement funds, you're going to want to think about a lot of things, right? Which you probably are in the process of. But this is just kind of in order. Things about like, what do your business and building owners really need? They might still really want facade improvement funds, or they might, really need some of the funds that I outlined in the buckets before. Does your funding source or your current fund framework allow for the expansion or temporary adjustment, or is that just a no-go? Do you have a loan fund that could become a grant fund, at least temporarily? Who are the stakeholders that would need to be involved in the decision-making? What are the paperwork, marketing, outreach, what's the time that's going to be a part of this if you are thinking about expanding or adjusting? And then, what kinds of paperwork are really involved in that? And then, of course, how would an adjustment or expansion change the project review process? So all things to consider, because your time is really precious right now, and, the shifting of the funds might really be worthwhile if you can do it. But, there are a lot of considerations to think about in that timeline. If you can't expand or adjust, like if you have a framework that just doesn't allow it, you might consider some tweaks to existing local incentives for facade improvements. You want to think about lowering or removing the match if that's a requirement, switching part of a loan fund to a grant fund, even temporarily, lowering or zeroing out the loan interest rate if you have a loan pool, or potentially extending loan deferral payment periods. I really just want to make these funds as accessible as possible right now, especially, even if they're just not, I don't mean to say just for facade improvements, like that's not enough. It's really important and a crucial element to our work in commercial districts, of course. But in this time period, when you're thinking about potentially shifting things around, these are just some ideas for that. And of course, messaging preservation incentives. Preservation is a key part of our work. And while right now, it might not be the top trending need, if we aren't able to adjust those funds, if we just have these facade improvement funds that we want to spend down or get out to people, just remember that in messaging, like design initiatives, incentives for preservation, they're really key to economic recovery. Even if they're targeted, even if they're really focused on those preservation initiatives only, it's still very crucial to the economic recovery and sustainable economic development. If a preservation incentive, again, if it can't be expanded or adjusted, just, in terms of messaging, just make sure you're underlining how important building maintenance is to your financial bottom lines for small businesses, how building maintenance prevents more significant costs that come with deferred maintenance, as many of you probably have firsthand experience with. Building maintenance helps with improved appearances and attracting customers and supporting that community culture and pride. So if you can't shift those funds, if those are strictly for facade improvements, there's a lot in even that facade improvement pool locally that can contribute to that economic recovery. So just some thoughts on that. Just a summary of what kinds of design initiatives can help support the business owner's bottom line, what design initiatives can help people keep people feeling safe and create these physically safe spaces, and of course design initiatives that help build a sense of community. Just a summary. This is something I had wanted to spend a little bit more time on, but I'll just throw it up here. Just when you're thinking about design and Main Street recovery, there are a lot of things to think about in the short term and the long term. But the short term, as we talked already a lot about some of this, but talking to partners is a really big thing. Being comfortable with iteration is good. It's okay to test. This is the time to do it, right? And then in longer term, thinking about the things that you can take from the shorter term and extend depending on need and success. Throwing this up there, there's some other resources aside from Main Street America and the National Trust that offer some really good guidance on some of the stuff we've talked about today. And again, you'll have this slide, but these are, there are so many leaders in this space, and it's exciting to have so many different kinds of resources to point to. And then finally, just some quick things I really wanted to highlight. Our COVID-19 resource page is always growing, so please check that out. This is the link to the webinar Shaw referred to, Historic Tax Credit as an Economic Recovery Tool. It's really good. It's excellent. Please, check it out when you have time. Great information on that tool. And then Main Street Alabama hosted a webinar on Tuesday on the design in the context of disaster. That was really great, and you can check that out on their website too. So we do have a couple of minutes for questions, and I will get to those, pop them out. All right, let's go. So, scrolling through. Okay, great question. Has anyone experienced pushback from restaurant owners who are worried about parklets taking up their curbside pickup space? That's a great question, and that's come up here and there in different conversations I've seen and talked to folks about. And I think that happens sometimes, and I think what folks have employed in terms of making business owners feel at ease is really involving them from the beginning in the conversation about what kinds of economic opportunity those provide, like looking at the value of the curbside pickup space versus the extension of the seating. And I think it really also depends on what stage in recovery the community is in. So if you're still in a zone where nobody's coming downtown, people are feeling really hesitant to get into being outside a whole lot, then maybe that curbside pickup space is the right thing. And then maybe it's one of those things where you plan it a little bit later to have the parklet be an option. So it's a great question. And I think if anybody has other answers to that, please feel free to write them in the chat box. I think that's something that comes up a lot with parklets, but there's some really good learning on how to engage small business owners in that. So there are some questions about the copy of the slides. Yeah, so this presentation, again, will be available as a recording. You can access it by linking or by clicking your registration link. You just have to sign in and it'll take you right to the recording. We'll also have the recording on that COVID-19 resource page, that link that I have at the top there, that you'll be able to access it via that page as well. And, if you have any trouble getting to any of those things, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm here, I work for Main Street America, happy to answer any questions you have. And I want to just say a quick word there. There was a comment in here about moving really quickly through the slides. I'm sorry that we went pretty fast and covered a lot of things in 60 minutes. Part of it is that there's a lot of really cool and innovative work going on right now. And I wanted to make sure we covered all the bases. If there was anything that I went through too quickly that you want more information on, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to go over anything in more detail. But I am not seeing anywhere. If there are any other questions, please feel free to type them in. We have about 1 minute left, and we're happy to cover those. If anybody else has questions, give you a little bit of space here. But if not, no problem. Obviously, feel free to reach out afterward. And if you have a question for Shaw and you're not able to reach him, you can feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you to him. Again, many thanks to everybody for participating. We're glad that this is of interest, and we're hoping, to keep engaging with you on this topic. And big thanks again to Shaw for participating, for being here. We really value our partnership with the National Trust, and specifically with the government relations team, who's just doing great work, keeping those incentives alive and helping with our economic recovery. So yeah, with that, we can just go ahead and close for today. But again, thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here.